Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for another great podcast. My name is Akram Bayat, and I'm a computer vision stream owner at Aggregate Intellect. For people who are new, ACE is a community of machine learning practitioners and researchers who have gathered around topics in AI engineering. We hope live session like this 3 to 5 times a week and produce premium content in various sub areas. To see more, please visit AI.SCIENCE and slides from this talk and other sessions and many more. Also, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channels and click the link to get notified about all the live sessions and other free content we publish. We currently have more than different streams that are focused on various machine learning topics, and this session is in the vision stream. Hope you enjoy and hope you come. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Amirhossein Bayat. Amir is a PhD student in computer science at Technical University of working on imaging, computer vision, and planning. Work strive toward 3D shape processing and construction using machine learning methods in the context of medical data. Has also co-organized challenges on vertebral segmentation and on application by medical imaging 2019 and 2020. Before he was a master student at for joining the program, he was a master student at the University of Science and Technology, bachelor at KNT University of Technology, both in computer engineering. Welcome, Amir. I pass the mic to you to give your great presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation and introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm going to present my work on inferring the 3D standing spine posture from two-dimensional radiographs. I'm also presenting this work at the MICAI conference this year, so it could be accessible from there as well. In this work, I'm going to introduce a deep neural network for reconstructing 3D shapes of a spine given two-dimensional radiographs. Here are some examples visualized. We have 2D radiographs or X-rays from different patients, and actually these 2D images are going to be the input to the neural network that we are going to introduce. And you can see the 3D reconstruction of the spine, which is superimposed on the input images. And as you see, they match each other. They are visualized as the network predictions. In the next sections, I'm going to go into more details about the network architecture, how we train it, and how we acquire the data for training such a model. The motivation for this work is that given the upright standing posture of a spine, we can do the load analysis or predict where the fractures could happen, or it could be used for surgery planning. Also, the treatment of the degenerative spinal disorders requires an understanding of the individual spinal anatomy and curvature in 3D. An upright standing spinal posture under natural weight bearing is crucial for such analysis, because when the body is under weight bearing, the curvature of a spine would be different than the other positions where the patient is lying down, for example. So two important features that we require from such a model is that first, it should be in upright standing posture, and second, it should be in 3D. Currently, we have different imaging modalities. There are CT scans and MRIs. These 3D volumetric imaging modalities are performed in patient lying down position. So the curvature of a spine is not what we need. It is 3D, but it's not the natural curvature of a spine. On the other hand, we have the radiographs. You can see some examples on the right from different views. The radiographs are captured when the patient is in upright standing position, but the problem is that they are two-dimensional. So our goal is to combine the upright spinal curvature from radiographs with 3D vertebral shapes from CT imaging for synthesizing an upright standing model of the spine in 3D. So that would be the goal of this work. More specifically, we are going to propose a novel neural network architecture, which is working vertebra-wise, and it takes orthogonal 2D radiographs and infers the spine's 3D posture. In here, as you can see, we have two slices of the CT scan on the left from the same patient, and on the right, we have orthogonal radiographs of another patient. Radiographs could be very challenging because, as you see in here, we have heavy tissue overlay, and radiographs are sometimes noisy, and then we have scaling effect because the imaging modality is completely different. And yeah, because of that, we have so many challenges in here. The other point to notice in here is that in our proposed method that I'm going to introduce in the next slide, we are combining both of the views from the radiographs. I mean, both coronal and sagittal views. The importance of this is that, for example, in the sagittal view radiograph in the middle, as you can see, some of the vertebrae are not visible at all because they are being occluded by some other bones. But on the other view, which is the coronal view, we can see it from another direction. So if we can combine both of the views for a single vertebra, we might be able to reconstruct the 3D shape. Here you can see an overview of the model. This is a fully convolutional neural network for combining the sagittal and coronal 2D images to synthesize the vertebra's 3D shape model. The network takes 4 two-dimensional inputs: the sagittal and coronal vertebral image patches and their corresponding annotation, which the annotation is indicating the vertebra of interest. Here, the vertebra of interest annotation is obtained by placing a disk of radius 1 around the vertebral centroid. They are annotated with red circles in here, and this is going to be the annotation input to the network. And in the next slide, I'm going to elaborate more on the model architecture. Our model consists of 3 different blocks: a 2D sagittal encoder, a 2D coronal encoder, and a 3D decoder. The 3 blocks are combined by a map and fuse block, and the map and fuse block is responsible for mapping the 3D representation of each sagittal and coronal view into intermediate 3D latent representation, followed by fusing them into a single 3D representation. We do it by channel-wise concatenation, and this representation is then fed to into the decoder, which is upsampling the 3D representation to reconstruct the 3D shape in voxel format. So the output would be a 3D voxelized representation. So in here, we had the 2D image inputs, and then in the output, we will have a 3D shape in the voxel format. The important thing to note in here is that each of the encoders are responsible for a different view, because they have to reconstruct a different missing dimension. One of them is for sagittal view, and the other one is for the coronal view. And we do this by applying anisotropic convolutions on different views. The other important detail in here is the blocks that I have visualized with red in the image. They are the self-attention layers that are important to have them to be able to combine the different input types, because one input is always an image patch, which is in gray level, and the other input is the vertebral annotation, which is a binary image. And using the self-attention module after some convolutional layers would help to combine the features that are extracted from different inputs. And after that, the output of the self-attention layer is going to be fed to the other layers. And after that, the map and fuse block, we have the map and fuse block, which is reconstructing the missing dimension for each of the views. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, they are going to be concatenated channel-wise and fed to the decoder. Please feel free to interrupt me if anything is not clear. I would go into more details. Yeah.
Amir, I have a question. Thank you so much so far. So my question is, could you please explain more about the vertebral annotation and tell us what are those annotations?
Yeah, sure. So in the previous slide, I introduced it here. The vertebral annotations is basically is in image format. So it would be a binary image. The size of the annotation inputs is exactly the same as the image patch, which includes the vertebra of interest. And the importance of having these annotations in here is that because in image patch, we might have more than a single vertebra. So we should kind of clarify it for the model, which vertebra is the vertebra of interest for us. So by adding this annotation and concatenating as an input to the network learns which vertebra to select in each patch and reconstruct the 3D shape. So as you see in here in this example, we have the central vertebra in there, vertebra of interest, and we have the adjacent ones. But in the output, the network has only reconstructed one vertebra. And it does that because we have this annotation in there.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Another question I have is about the architecture.
Yeah, sure.
So you have two encoders, right? And
Yeah.
are you using weight sharing here?
Okay, that's a very good question. In here, we are not using weight sharing because each of the encoders is responsible for a different view. And because we are using anisotropic convolutions to reconstruct a different view, we are reconstructing a different dimension. The convolutional layer settings are different. And as a result, we cannot use the weight sharing technique in here. So they have been trained, they are separate networks, yeah, sub-networks.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and next, for training such a network, using only a regression loss leads to convergence to a local optimum, where a mean shape is usually predicted, especially in highly varying regions of the vertebra, such as the vertebral process. And this is rectified by augmenting the loss with an adversarial component, which checks the validity of the prediction at a global level. So our model is trained in a fully supervised manner by optimizing a combination of an L1 distance, L1 distance loss, and an adversarial loss based on the least square GAN. And here you can see the different terms we have included in the loss function. And for each of the terms, we have defined a coefficient by alpha G and alpha D. And in the best setting, alpha G is 10 times more than alpha D. So the importance of the penalty we get from the L1 distance is always more. Yeah. So for training this network, we work with 950 CT scans, including 12,000 vertebra. The CT scans are segmented using a deep neural network. The vertebral masks are used for supervision. Generation of corresponding digitally reconstructed radiographs is performed using a ray casting approach, wherein we simulate the vertebra, we simulate the spinal radiographs given CT data. And the reason is that for radiographs, for 2D radiographs, we don't have any 3D ground truths to be able to train our networks, right? So that's why we have to do kind of simulation. We simulate the radiographs using CT scans, for which we have the 3D ground truths. And the 3D ground truths, as I mentioned, are acquired using a deep neural network for vertebral segmentation. And part of this data set that we are using in here is from the Verse challenge at MICAI. It was a challenge both in MICAI 2019 and 2020. It's a challenge on a larger scale vertebra segmentation, and yeah, anyone can download the dataset. It's publicly available, and after submitting the results, they could be compared to the other submissions. And actually, we have a live leaderboard in there. But anyway, in here we used part of the Verse dataset and some other datasets. It was multicentral, and used the 3D shapes or 3D segmentations as ground truths, and then did the simulation for the radiographs. I'm going to explain how we exactly do the simulation using CT data. And finally, we had about 200 clinical radiographs. So they are real radiographs from the patients. And we applied the model on them, and the results were evaluated by expert radiologists. Here, for qualitative evaluation of the method, I have visualized two examples. This figure illustrates 3D shape models reconstructed using our proposed architecture. The first column indicates the image input. Second and third columns visualize the ground truth vertebral mass, and the fourth visualizes the predicted 3D shape model. Last column shows an overlaid chamfer distance map between the point clouds of the ground truth and the prediction. Yeah, so Yeah, I should say that the input images in here are actually patches from the DRRs, which are simulated radiographs from CT, and because of that we had the ground truths, and I have actually overlaid it on the image patches as you see in here on the second column. And the vertebra we have in the first row is from thoracic spine, and the one in the bottom is from lumbar spine. As you see on the last column, the chamfer distance map, it measures the disagreement between the network prediction and the ground truth, which is in point cloud format. And as you see, the main disagreement in both of the models is in the vertebral process part. And the main reason is that during the simulations and also in the clinical radiographs, the vertebral process is very difficult to be uh, visualized. Actually, it's not visible. Because of that, the model is usually confused when it is reconstructing the complete shape. So that's the problem we usually have in here. But usually for biomechanical analysis, that's the application of this work later on. The vertebral bodies are more important. So, but as you see in here, the vertebral bodies are reconstructed better. And in the next step, we conduct an architectural ablative study. The performance, as you see here, the performance improves with addition of each component in the model. And in the last row, you can see that we achieve 95% of DICE score for reconstruction. The first row is when the model is using only one of the encoders, and we used the sagittal view, obviously because we have more shape information available in the sagittal view. So we tried to train a model given only one view, and then we have the DICE score, and also we evaluated the model using the Hausdorff distance. After that, we used the naive view fusion, or outer product of the different views, and we have the results in there. As you can see, there is a significant improvement after including the other view as a network input. So if you, as I mentioned in the previous slides, some vertebrae are not visible from one view, but they are visible from the other view, probably because they are being occluded by the other bones or other tissues. By including the other view in here, in the second experiment, we have improved the DICE score. But for fusing the information from different views, we didn't include the encoders, we just did an outer product of the images. And after that, in order to validate the encoder architecture of ours, we used both of the encoders. And again, the DICE score improved for more than 2%. And the other component which is important in the network architecture is the self-attention layer, as I mentioned earlier. The importance of self-attention layer is that it helps to fuse the information from different modalities. For example, we had these annotations and the image patches. After including the self-attention layer, the model performance was again improved. And finally, we trained the model using the GAN setting, or we trained it in an adversarial setting, and we got the best result finally. So this way we validate the importance of each component in our network. And in here we have full 3D spine models, and after reconstructing each vertebra, because we know the location of each patch, and then we can stack all of the 3D vertebral shapes on each other and reconstruct the 3D spinal shape. In the top row, we have a DRR-based spine model, and after reconstruction, it is compared with this 3D CT ground truth mask. So as you see here on the left, we have the ground truth 3D shape, and on the right, we have the reconstruction. And because this was from a CT, we had the ground truth to be able to compare them qualitatively. And in the other row, in the bottom row, the 3D patient-specific spine models constructed from real radiographs or clinical radiographs are visualized. We had 2 different patients, and the resulting 3D spine is visualized from different views. And as you see, the curvature of the spine really matches the patient's body curvature. Yeah, and for simulating the radiographs or generating the digitally reconstructed radiographs, we used ray casting technique. So it would be like we have a 3D object, we define a source of light or the focal point, and we can easily calculate the integral of each line from the focal point or the source of light to the detector, which is going to be the simulated radiograph. So by doing this calculation, we can simulate the radiographs, and here are the results. And because we have the corresponding shape, we can train the network to do the inverse simulation. So it could reconstruct the 3D shapes given these 2 orthogonal images. And the other important thing in here is that for acquiring the annotations in the input, we used another deep neural network. So we don't have to provide manual annotations as inputs to the network. This is another work we introduced last year. This network is trained to predict the vertebral centroids and also the labels of each vertebra. And the result is going to be a mask with the same size of the input image, and all of the vertebral centroids are being annotated with a different label. Actually, and doing vertebral labeling in radiographs is much more complicated than the normal landmark detection tasks, because as I mentioned, radiographs are usually very noisy, and we have this occlusion problem as well. So the other challenge in here is that spinal radiographs are usually in large size. So the conventional networks like UNet are not, the receptive field of the UNet is not usually enough to cover the entire input image. So in that work, we proposed a residual component to be added on top of UNet, and both of the networks are being trained jointly to predict the vertebral coordinates. And the other technique we have used in here is the soft argmax, because the argmax function itself is not differentiable, so it could not be integrated in a network to be trained jointly or end-to-end. So we use the soft argmax technique, and after that we have some fully connected layers. So because of these fully connected layers, the receptive field of the network in the last layer covers the entire input image. And this way we address the challenge of big size of the input images. And here you can see some examples of the network. It can be trained and deployed on both of the views of different radiographs. As you can see in here, the predictions, the network predictions are visualized with red dots, and the ground truths are are visualized with green cross. And I think the performance of the network is around the error was around 5 millimeter, so it's acceptable for this application. And as you see, the network is able to work with different spinal curvature, and also in some cases the patient has some implants inside the spine, but it doesn't affect the performance of the network. For example, the fourth image from the left. And yeah, we use this network to provide annotations for the network we introduce in this work. Yeah. And yeah, thank you for your attention, and you can contact me if you have any questions. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Amir,
Sure.
for your talk. It was very interesting topic and informative session. So we know that the 3D actually constructing 3D shapes from 2D is an active research topic, but you covered all aspects of the problem. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
So
sure.
have a question from our audience. Lee Charlie is asking, is this work done in collaboration with Medschool, and how many radiographs is needed to train the neural network?
Okay. Yes, actually, this work was done. Actually, it was a collaboration between the informatic department of the Technical University of Munich and the university hospital. So the data was mostly provided by the university hospital, and there was also supervision from the computer science department. And for training this network in here, we used 950 CT scans. So we could simulate the orthogonal radiographs using these scans. And using another deep neural network, we segment the CT scans. And finally, we had something like 12,000 vertebra in the data set.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And I have a question. As you mentioned, one application for expanding spine posture modeling is biomechanical analysis, right? So
Yes.
what are the biggest works for biomechanical analysis, and how is your method is different from the current approach?
Yeah. So currently, for doing this biomechanical analysis, the work is not automated, and usually the researchers use a general model of a spine for different patients, and the alignment between the model and the patient's data is usually done manually. As I have referred to some papers in my own work, it's accessible right now. But in this work, we can reconstruct a 3D shape of a spine for each patient specifically. So we are not using a general purpose model. And the other thing is the efficiency of the work. Once the model is trained, the inference could be done within less than a second. So no manual work should be done in here. It's much faster.
I see. Okay, thank you. And regarding the annotations, why did you choose vertebral centroid as input annotations?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, yeah, as I mentioned, we have used only the centroids, which is a disc with a radius of 1. And the reason is that finally we are going to deploy the model on clinical radiographs, right? But in clinical radiographs, as you're seeing here, it's not easy to annotate more than only a vertebral centroid. I mean, we could train the model using the entire vertebral body annotation, but we couldn't apply the model on the radiographs. So we tried to use the sparsest possible annotation to train the model. So later we could use the other model that I introduced at the end to acquire the annotations from the radiographs and test the model.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
the importance is the sparsity in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And regarding your data, we actually don't have 3D ground truths, right, for the radiograph. Could you
Yes.
explain how you train your network?
Yeah, sure. So we, as you said, we don't have the 3D ground truth for the radiographs. So we had to find a way to simulate the radiographs from CT, right? CT scans. And by doing the ray casting process that I explained here, right? We could simulate each radiograph, each each view of the CT and do the simulation for the DRRs. And because we had the corresponding 3D shapes, which was provided by another deep neural network, we could train the network to predict the 3D shapes given the radiographs, image patches. And yeah, the annotations for the simulated radiographs was also done by the network I introduced in here.
Okay. And my last question is, how do you think we can advance this field of research in future, or what are your suggestions for the future work?
Yeah, I think one problem in here is that currently we don't have any specific metric to evaluate the results on the clinical radiographs. Because for example, we have the DRRs and we have the corresponding ground truths, as you can see in here. So we have quantitative method to evaluate the output. But for the radiographs, we don't have the ground truth, right? We are only relying on the results we got from the DRRs. And the radiographs in here are only evaluated qualitatively by expert radiologists from the hospital. So if we can find a way to evaluate the results for clinical radiographs, that would be a significant improvement for this work. And for for example, if we have radiographs, the orthogonal radiographs of a patient, and then we have the CT scan of the same patient, and we are able to segment the vertebra in the CT image, and then find a way to compare the resulting CT segmentations to the predictions of the model, then we can consider it as an evaluation method. But the problem is that, as I said, the orientation of the vertebra would be different because the curvature of the spine is different, and there is no direct way to compare the rigid bodies in 3D.
Okay, thank you so much. And we have another question from our audience. Luke is asking, I wonder if this network can be used in other image tasks, not just in spine posture, any other application for the network?
Yeah, sure. It could be used for different 3D reconstruction problems, especially where we have this occlusion problem, as I introduced in here. For the problems that we don't have this occlusion and noise, we can use a simpler setting, but in order to be able to fuse the shape information from different views, yeah, this architecture would be a good use case. And then for the applications, yeah, there are different applications for this task, probably in medical imaging field. Yeah, where we want to fuse the multi-view radiographs and reconstruct the 3D shape.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amir, for the great presentation. We really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the audience for joining us. Again, to see more content like this, visit AI.SCIENCE and log in to access the slides from this and other sessions and many more. Also, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, ML Paper Explained, to get notified about all the live sessions and other free content we publish. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.